Well, thank you, Monica. Responding to the question, energy transition decision making, are we up to the task? Let me just kind of harken back to Monica mentioned earlier on. The next phase of positive energy is focused on trust and transition. In other words, helping to engender an environment where the public have confidence that decision makers, and I would say three things. One, know what they're talking about. Two, are being honest with people about it. And three, are responding with appropriate and cost-effective policy action. I think it's probably fair to say, looking back over the past 2 or 3 decades of energy and climate change policy, that the public have good reason for skepticism on all three counts. But I am going to answer with a qualified yes, a heavily qualified yes, that will require that we get a lot better at understanding a number of things. Those things would include the nature of the change involved, the physical scale of the change, the time scale on which the change takes place in big capital-intensive systems, typically taking place over decades, and yet we've only set ourselves a relatively small number of decades to get this done. The nature and degree of change in institutional systems and business models, something that often gets skipped over. And finally, the degree to which conditions external to Canada and outside of our control in technology and markets will largely dictate the way it unfolds. We're not going to arrive at a complete understanding of all of this this afternoon, but a good first step is to at least understand the challenge. So let me start with the nature and the physical scale, and you may be wondering what this diagram is doing up here. Right? It's also in your materials. It's known as a Sankey diagram. And it shows energy flows from primary energy on the left-hand side of the diagram through to end use, and including both imports and exports. And it does give you a sense of the scale of things as you look at it. A few things maybe just to take note of. On the lower right, what you can see is about half of the energy that flows into the domestic end use space ends up one way or the other as losses. And in fact, losses throughout the energy value chain remain significant, and remain one of our biggest opportunities as well as one of our biggest challenges as we address where we're going on this, and undoubtedly I would say needs much more attention in the debate than it's getting. There's a lot of discussion these days about the idea of electrifying pretty much all of energy end use. But keep this in proportion. Electricity today accounts for about a fifth of energy end use, as you can see on the bottom middle. And what that means is that the scale of change here would be larger than that would involve, let's say, for example, in the growth of the petroleum economy over the course of the last 60 years in the last century. In other words, it is a massive transition. Of course, in order for this scale of electrification to make any sense, the power system needs to produce zero or virtually zero greenhouse gas emissions. And although the technological options exist, and what we're seeing, especially recently, is a dramatic change in the economics of wind and solar energy, the technological options all exist, but they all pose their own challenges. Without significant further cost reductions, almost all the options promise higher electricity costs in the future. A system based heavily on intermittent resources, large-scale storage, and a mix of central and distributed resources poses new system management and regulatory challenges, something that our regulatory friends are increasingly grappling with. And of course, including the extensive new transmission that will be involved in this system, it will have much larger land impacts than fossil-based systems, and on the evidence to date, all of that will prove controversial with local communities. So all very real challenges, ones that in fact the Positive Energy Project has been turning its mind to and will continue to. The corollary of all of that, of very rapid electrification, if we go down that road, is the corresponding stranding of fossil-based assets whose underutilization or early abandonment would entail costs which someone will have to absorb. And some of that cost will probably end up on consumer or taxpayer doorsteps, whether they know it yet or not. And finally, Jay mentioned earlier on Canada's fossil fuel exports. It's worth recalling the scale of Canada's petroleum and natural gas exports, which show up on the upper right-hand side of the chart there. Together in 2016, these comprised around 12% of our merchandise exports compared to a little over 20% in 2012, which was a year of higher oil prices. So that gives it some sense of proportion. And then looking forward, the International Energy Agency's 2017 World Energy Outlook in its Sustainable Development Scenario, that is the optimistic one on the environment front, envisages world oil demand peaking and then starting to decline, but not until after 2040. In other words, the world oil economy will probably continue until well past 2050. And despite what is happening in the rest of the world, many commentators believe that Canada should be getting out of this business and getting out of it in a hurry. I was pleased to hear Jay's comments and pleased to hear Secretary Shakar on this, that view isn't necessarily shared by the government. But the point is that if Canada doesn't meet this demand, other countries will. In a world of growing threats to many export sectors, Canadians should think very, very carefully indeed before deliberately hobbling important export industry. It's worth reminding ourselves that this transition involves a goal of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2005 levels by 2050, or just over 30 years from now. For reference, 2015 emissions were about 2% below 2005. Canada has gone through several big energy changes over the past 120 years or so, from an energy economy dominated by wood to a petroleum economy to the multi-fuel economy in which we live today. And based on history, one can argue that a time horizon of 30 years or so for a big change is very fast, but not out of the question. But no one should be under any illusions that it will be easy. It eventually involves, notwithstanding where we stand today with respect to our traditional energy industries, it will eventually involve the steady decline of one of our largest export industries. And nothing, so far at least, about our comparative advantage in other energy technologies suggests that this will be easily replaced. Interesting challenge, thinking about how we do that. From a consumer perspective, it reduces rather than adding to energy diversity, and almost certainly involves an increase in energy costs. It will entail a number of intrusive and potentially costly government action throughout the energy economy, and it will involve a great deal of new physical infrastructure with a corresponding impact on the landscape. And of course, if we look back, hydro and nuclear systems both involve extensive government action, and in the case of hydro, big land impact. But much has changed from 50 years ago. Unlike past changes, this transformation will occur in an era when the public expects to have a say, when many projects will be refused, and those that do get done will take a great deal longer and entail higher capital costs and risks for investors. Which leads me to my fourth element, and very quickly wrapping up, Monica, concerning changes in business models and regulatory systems that we can anticipate, just as we did with other energy transformations. There's no reason in principle why Canada should not be able to absorb these sorts of changes, but far too little of the debate so far has even acknowledged the scale of the change or their nature, and for public institutions in particular, if that is going to be a big challenge and one that is going to be politically fraught. And finally, just to wrap it up, we need to remind ourselves that much of what we are able to do will be determined by forces outside of Canada. Factors such as world oil markets, natural gas markets, the emergence of a widespread electricity-based transport sector, and the further development of renewable power technologies and electricity storage all will be determined for the most part outside of Canada, and not so much in other capital cities or in international agreements as in world financial and technological centers. Canada can contribute to all of this, and our inventors, our investors, our entrepreneurs will no doubt help bring benefits to Canada, but we will be market and technology takers, not shapers. And being mindful of this reality will be part of the challenge in front of us. So wrapping it up, I want to emphasize here that my intent here is not counsel of despair, but a plea for common sense and attention to fact. A big transformation by mid-century is not out of the question, but it will need realism and resolve by policymakers and the public well beyond what Canada has demonstrated in the past few decades. Are we up to the task? Good, Mike.